There's a huge political furore in the heat of elections that soon emerged as the first phase of voting got over, with Prime Minister Modi leading the charge against the Congress, alleging a wealth redistribution agenda, with imageries of Mangal Sutra to contrast with imageries of infiltrators and people with more children, topping Prime Minister Modi's political rhetoric, followed by all top BJP leaders. Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge claimed to seek time for a meeting with Prime Minister Modi, saying he would like to explain what the Congress manifesto aims to do, in contrast to what Prime Minister Modi has been claiming. To Rahul Gandhi claiming that BJP is rattled, Prime Minister Modi is rattled, and Priyanka Gandhi's pointed counter to Prime Minister Modi with her mother's Mangal Sutra being sacrificed for this country. But while this is becoming the strong political rhetoric, what's the reality of wealth redistribution in India? Or for that matter, the reality of wealth distribution in India? That's what we are going to be looking at. According to All India Debt and Investment Survey, average household wealth was highest among Hindu high castes, 41%, followed by Hindu OBCs, 31%. Followed by Muslim households and 8%, that was at 8%. And then you have scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Scheduled castes at 7.3% and the scheduled tribes at 3.7%. But it isn't about one religion or one group versus the others. And here is where a 2019 study of wealth ownership and inequality in India is important for a complete picture. So while just a bird's eye view on this data shows 41% of the wealth in the country owned by Hindu high castes, almost double their population size as it were at 22.28%, it is important to understand that this by itself isn't a homogeneous group. A study found that the share of wealth in the hands of the bottom 50% of households to the poorest ones. So compare the 50% households, the wealth that they own, to the poorest 1%. If this is the comparison, then this is the lowest among the Hindu high castes, followed by the Hindu OBCs, Muslims, scheduled tribes and scheduled castes. Hindu high castes hold much more wealth in the top economic groups and less wealth in their bottom economic groups as compared to any other socio-religious group for that matter. This study in a way lends credence to what Modi government's move was a few years ago to introduce a new quota for economically weaker sections. Now the two, and this is important, the next point, the two biggest asset classes in the country are land and building, constituting more than 90% of the total assets in the country. And this, in fact, is the biggest discrepancy as well when it comes to the different groups. This is a 2-year study which was conducted by the Savitri Phule Pune University, Jawaharlal Nehru, as well as Indian Institute of Dalit Studies from 2015 to 2017 based on NSSO data. Now let's look at how much of gold is held by whom. Hindu OBCs, 39.1%. Hindu high castes, 31.3%. Scheduled castes, 9.9%. Muslims, 9.2%. Scheduled tribes at 3.4%. Again, All India Debt and Investment Survey is the source for this. In fact, if we look at states' wealth distribution in India, Maharashtra at 17.5%, Uttar Pradesh at 11.6%, Kerala at 7.4%, Tamil Nadu at 7.2%, and Haryana at 6%. But why am I really talking about this? Because while there's so much of political rhetoric back and forth, there is so much that needs to be known in terms of what India's reality is. And another big challenge, that is just what seems to be a political rhetoric based on very minimal data. Now, what is it that Congress manifesto has promised? Welfare of the poor will be the first charge. Well, this is the exact words to quote them. If we can have that particular line, welfare of the poor will be the first charge. And this essentially reading as priority. And that on all government resources, nationwide social, economic, caste census would be done. Affirmative action based on collected census census data that would be collected, economic empowerment of minorities, stating nearly 22 crore people are poor. Rahul Gandhi has said that nearly 2 weeks ago that Congress, if voted into office in the Lok Sabha elections, would conduct a financial and institutional survey to ascertain who is in possession of the wealth of the country and would then undertake an exercise to redistribute the same. He also promised representation of each community in every sector. Jitni abadi, utna haq principle. This is something that Rahul Gandhi has repeated quite a few times. In fact, even last year for that matter, what he has tried attributing at this point is to a caste census for the scheduled castes, for the scheduled tribes, backward castes, to try to know the exact population, the status that exists for everybody. And after that, the financial and institutional surveys would begin. Subsequently, we will take up the historic assignment to distribute the wealth of India, jobs and other welfare schemes to these sections based on their population. That is something that Rahul Gandhi has said. Now, what Congress has not done is promise redistribution of wealth, as in their manifesto. Neither of the wealth being taken and given to Muslims, though the BJP, including Prime Minister Modi, used a statement of Manmohan Singh, former Prime Minister, on Muslims, saying that he said they had the first right to resources, but countered by the Congress, and the Congress clarified by the then Prime Minister's office as well as an area of priority. We will have to devise innovative plans to ensure that minorities, particularly the Muslim minority, are empowered to share equitably in the fruits of development. They must have the first claim on resources. The centre has a myriad other responsibilities whose demands will have to be fitted within the overall resource availability. That's what the then Prime Minister's office had clarified as well. I'm being joined right now by Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, who's a senior economist, as well as Sanjeev Ahluwalia, who's a senior economist as well. And we're going to try and understand the different perspectives to what seems to be this very politically volatile, rhetoric, or even polarizing issue. Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, to you first. My first question to you: what does affirmative action really mean? What could be affirmative actions? Would it include distribution or redistribution of wealth as well?
Sneha, first of all, thank you very much for starting it off in a rather reasonable way rather than in the other channels that I've been on, where they only want to polarize, when in fact the whole objective of this debate should be a serious one. So first of all, thank you very much. I don't think any sensible economist would tell you that you redistribute what people currently have. That's not the way life works. That's not the way economies work. That's not the way rich countries did it. However, there is a way of proceeding. Let me explain how it was done in the rich countries. I will come back to how it can be done in our country. Between 1914 and 1980, inheritance tax and wealth tax, as well as progressive corporate tax and progressive income tax, was gradually, sequentially used. All four instruments were used in order to mobilize more revenues for the government as per capita incomes rose. Now, how are these increasing revenues used? They were used to spend more on the health of the population, more on the education of the population, and more on social security for the population. And that's why rich countries are rich countries, because you have a very strong state which mobilizes tax revenues in a variety of ways, and revenues as they come in. You don't distribute what exists today. So, the bogey that the government is actually putting out is completely misleading. Just as the talk about, distribution to the Muslims of Mangal Sutra was misleading, similarly, this rubbish is also misleading. And in any case, as far as the Congress manifesto is concerned, they haven't even talked about inheritance tax or wealth tax, though I believe they should have, because that's the standard way in which it has been done, in addition to corporate tax, in addition to progressive income tax.
Okay.
Because
All
that's
right.
the only way it can be done, especially in a state. Let me say this last sentence, Sneha. Especially in a situation where the debt of this country has gone from 56% of GDP to 82% of GDP in a matter of 4 or 5 years. And the debt of the whole country has gone from 55 lakh crores in 2014 to over 200 lakh crores. This is going to be a burden on you, on me, on Mr. Ahluwalia, and your children and my grandchildren. Back to you, Sneha.
Okay. All right. Okay, let me get in Sanjeev Ahluwalia at this point also. You heard Dr. Santosh Mehrotra as well, Mr. Sanjeev Ahluwalia. I'm going to ask you the same question and give you the same time so both of you have the same platform to put in your requests. My question, if I have to repeat this, when we talk about wealth distribution, about prioritizing a group of people, would this include, or, in fact, my question should be, if there is a promise of affirmative action, would that include automatically wealth redistribution, or could there be other means as well? What would affirmative action in a political manifesto mean for an economist like you? And for a viewer who not necessarily is an economist, this is to both of you.
Many ways of defining. Yeah. So, Neha, from my point of view, I don't see wealth as only being in land or in shares or in your bank account or in the buildings that you own. In the world that we are moving into, real wealth is actually the human capacity that you have. That is the real wealth of the nation. And I'm sure Mr. Mehrotra would not disagree with this. And so I think that there are many instances in history where very rich and well-to-do nations are overtaken, and that is happening even today, by nations which are much poorer than them. So in that sense, their land is valued lower, there are fewer financial assets, so per capita their wealth is lower. But that means nothing, because in the period of, if you look at the rise of both China and India, India is still rising, China seems to have peaked. Over a space of 20 or 30 years, they've created wealth which not many countries would be able to do on their own. So I think we should not think narrowly of wealth as one does in the financial sense. Wealth is much broader. And I would even add over here social amity, community coherence, the feeling that you belong to one nation. All these are part of the national wealth of India and of any other country. So when you look at the wealth in this manner, the redistribution aspect or the affirmative action aspect, what does it really mean? That means providing opportunities to those whom opportunities have not been available in the past. And these can range, and they should start first and foremost, as Mr. Mehrotra mentioned, with educational and health opportunities to live a healthy life and to be skilled and educated and ready for the future. So I think these are some of the aspects that we must consider when we decide how are we to redistribute both our revenue, which is on an annual basis, and also what we may consider to be our wealth, which is in fixed assets.
Okay. Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, my next question to you at this point would be, now when we are looking at a concept such as wealth distribution, and we look at the numbers, and I went through the numbers about how wealth seems to be distributed in India's demography. We looked at different religions and the subcastes as well. In fact, if you look at the Hindu, among Hindus itself, the Hindu high caste groups, they themselves are not one homogeneous group for that matter. And then, of course, you have the Hindu OBCs, the Muslims, as well as the scheduled tribes and scheduled castes. The wealth ownership is there on the screens for the viewers to see again as a reference. My question to you, do we have ample data? Is there data for India today to understand where the wealth is, where the wealth is not? How is the wealth being owned? How is the wealth being distributed in the economy economically? Do we have ample? Because as I was trying to research this, I found a problem with data.
No, that's not true. Yeah, the data is there. So, I'm happy to actually share the link to a study with you, which you can put out as a tweet perhaps tomorrow morning or tonight. The study that was just recently done by Professors Chansor, Piketty, Somanchi, and Bharti, which came out on the 18th of March, and it's actually about wealth inequality as well as income inequality in India over a historical period, and they have brought together a whole variety of sources of data, and they worked extremely hard and extremely meticulously, extremely carefully to put this data together. So on the wealth side, the data, Sneha, is actually in the asset and investment, the debt survey that you mentioned. Last was 2019. Every 5 years, the National Sample Survey Organization does this, and our last survey was of 2019. It is true that we don't collect income data, so we don't have income data, but we can actually put that together also from various sources. What we do collect is consumption data.
Okay.
However, income data can also be actually put together. When you add that to the asset data, which is in the NSSO survey, it's actually perfectly possible to construct a series. G.
All right. Sanjeev Ahluwalia, when we talk about this entire wealth distribution, the whole gamut to it also, as mentioned, has a very strong connect with what seems to be the caste census that has also now become highly politicized, with several political parties from the opposition especially who have sought for a caste census. Now, how important is this caste census in today's India, not as a political tool, but for India as a whole? How critical is it? And are the opposition parties really implying of a caste census for the way that it needs to be, for the way how it should be, for the way what needs to be reflected?
Neha, you can never have too little statistics. Surveys are an extremely important tool for people who are making policy to understand who they are making the policy for, and also in what way should the policy be formulated so that it's successful when it's implemented on the ground. So most definitely the socioeconomic survey would be a very, very welcome tool for policy making, for analysts, for researchers, for everybody. But it's not just this survey. There are many surveys that are pending to be done. And I think the more we get down to the task of surveying diligently on the basis of accepted standards and formulations, and if we put out the information that we collect early, that would be an enormous help for anybody, both business, private, and government. So there is no doubt about the need
All right.
for
In
a
fact, that's an interesting
socio-economic
point because
survey.
there were many
I
states, at
don't
least
think it
few
will
states,
spring many
including Karnataka,
surprises.
that did do a caste census, but they never really brought out the results. Caste survey, if it was not a census really, but they never brought out the results as well. So that being one challenge. I'm also being joined by Vijay Sardana at this point. Vijay Sardana, uh, thank you for joining us. Good evening.
Good evening.
We've had a panelist talk about this all right, I know Santosh Mehrotra. Let me just get the introductory remarks from Vijay Sardana and I'll come to you. Vijay Sardana, how do you really look at what's unfolding vis-a-vis wealth distribution? Because the fact remains, the whole row over what seems to happen right now is from Congress manifesto, as said by Prime Minister himself. What they have said, though, is affirmative action.
Well, see, first we have to understand whether this is a problem or debate is related to wealth distribution or wealth creation or wealth earned. I think we have to differentiate that. Nobody is distributing wealth in India. You are earning because of your hard work. I am earning because of mine and fellow panelists and the rest of the country. The issue is that we have to provide opportunity, equal opportunity for everyone to upgrade their skills. That is the role of a government and governance. But if I follow all the laws and constitution of India and with my entrepreneurship, with my skills, with my capability, with my extra hard work, with my, if I say overtime, sleepless nights, if I create wealth, please don't degrade by saying wealth distribution. Nobody distributed to me. I applied my intellectual capital, I worked hard, I put sweat on it, and I earned out of it. So this is a big myth. It is a socialist concept that somebody is distributing to me. It is not. If I'm creating an intellectual property, IPR, patents, people are liking my product, paying for it, and within the laws of India, if I'm making wealth and also paying my due taxes as per the law of India, where is the problem? Now issue comes up is yes, some people, those who have created wealth, they have really done well in life, and they all started from very basic. Dhirubhai Ambani was a vendor on a, if I say that, on a petrol pump worker, and if with his skill set and understanding of the
No, if
market,
you
if he
go
has
in
created
that
wealth,
line, if you go
that is
in
a
that
problem.
line, then no, if you go into that line, then the arguments can go really both ways. You may pick up cases that may suit you, but there are also cases to suit the other side as well. So that really is not a case of argument that we really can take, because examples can suit both the lines, sir.
No, point is,
30,
as long
maybe
as
40
as
seconds
long
before I
as
go across to Dr. Santosh Mehrotra.
as long as I have not violated any law of the land, any example is suitable to me. If I violated the law of the land, if I have done something which is illegal, it is bad and that should be clamped down. One has to be very clear. So those who are claiming
All right.
that wealth distribution is uneven, is this because of legal means or illegal means? That should be pre-qualified first.
Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, is this whole ambiguity that seems to be around what has emerged as the Congress manifesto, is it the ambiguity of it or the politics around it that is creating this entire divide?
It's the politics which is creating a divide, Sneha. There is no ambiguity in the concept at all. And let me start where Mr. Ahluwalia left off. You know, he made a profoundly important point when he excuse me, when he made when he said that the most important wealth for any society is the human capital. You know, think about it for a second. A friend of mine who was with me in the Planning Commission 10 years ago always says this, and I love to quote him, Arun Maira. He says, human beings are the only appreciating asset. Human beings are the only appreciating asset. The more you put into human beings, the more their value appreciates. What is the meaning of that? The meaning of that is that the more opportunities you have, I have, Sanjeev has, and Mr. Vijay has, the more we will thrive. But this applies to all people who are less privileged. more under or more at the margins of our society. So it is all right for Mr. Sardana to say, and it's all right for Mr. Sardana to say, as long as I'm not violating the but that he's starting out with a base which is much higher in terms of his human capital. So are we making sure that we are building a society, philosophically speaking, and the Constitution allows for that, that are we building a society which actually is not socialist? Please not misunderstand this, confuse this. Because no European country, no America, United States, Canada are not socialist, but they are much more equitable countries than they used to be 100 years ago. We have become more unequal, as the data will show you, which is the Piketty, Chancellor, etc. study, which I'll be very happy to share with you as soon as this show ends. And you please put it out on Mirror now. So the important point, finishing, that health education gives you the opportunity to thrive. And for that, you need inheritance tax, corporate tax, personal income tax in a progressive manner, and also a wealth tax.
Okay, Rajiv Sardana, to you. When we... All right, sure. So, Vijay Sardana, if I can come to you. Now, we went through this earlier today, a while ago, and we looked at the wealth distribution right now in India with the data that was available 2019. If it was Hindu high castes owning 41%, Hindu OBCs 31%, Muslims 8%, scheduled castes 7.3%, scheduled tribes 3.7%. And even if you look at the Hindu high caste, they are not one homogeneous group. Within that, the higher caste, they own so much more than the lower high castes, as it were. So there's no homogeneous group. Now, where does, if you talk about affirmative action, if you talk about caste census, where does distribution of wealth to Muslims come into play here alone?
See, you have to understand one thing, which you have. Let me take an example what you are quoting. Hindu high caste, I think there should be a study that why they are able to create wealth, which others are not able to. Is this the skill set? Is this their hard work, intellectual capability, educational background, social support, government policies? What were the factors which led to the high growth? And the same, if options are available to every other caste, then why they were left behind? That one has to understand. Second aspect is that if suppose there are 10 factors which led to the wealth creation by a higher class, why don't you provide the same enabling environment to the lower class as well, so that they become equally competent and capable to earn the wealth? Instead of robbing rich and paying poor, this is like a Robin Hood policy. You are not doing anything as a governance. You are not able to create a sensible policy environment in the country in the last 75 years. And people, because of their entrepreneurship, are becoming rich. Now you are realizing that there is a caste or there is a wealth divide in the country because of your own incompetency. Now you want to rob the rich and pay to the poor. Is this logical? So it is like you want to kill a golden goose. What will happen? If people realize this government is illogical, they will shift their base from India to Dubai or UK, America, somewhere else. Then what you will do? They will continue to run the factories in India. They will use your labor force. They will create wealth and migrate that wealth out of India. Will you like that? So I think this is an illogical argument. What people are today
let me just go across to Dr. Santosh Mehrotra on this. Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, do you want to answer what Vijay Sardana is saying? I'll give you possibly a maximum of 1 minute because I then want to go to Sanjeev Ahluwalia for the last response to the show.
Indeed. I will not take more than a minute. The point is very simple. You will have to design a set of taxes in such a way that you don't scare people away. It's a matter of design. So let's not get into the details of this. We can't decide on policy in a television debate. My final point, half a minute. Socioeconomic caste census is something that was done between 2011 and 13. It was completed in 14. I actually helped design it when I was in the Planning Commission. It was based on a paper that I did And we already have the data. All that the Congress will have to do if it comes to power is to put that data out in the public domain. This government didn't put caste data out in the public domain. And now 10 years have passed, we will have to actually do a new caste census in order to ensure to find out who, and actually this government has been using that data to identify who's going to get the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, who's going to get the Ayushman Bharat. So, enough said.
Okay, all right. Mr. Sanjeev Ahluwalia, my last question to you, and you would have the privilege of the closing comments in the show. Between all the political rhetoric of Mangal Sutras, of Ghusbetiyas, and a rattled BJP, if it was so, I just want to put out two statistics. 1% Indians own 40% of country's wealth. That's the richest 1%. And the richest 1% Indians earn 22.6% of country's income. How would you look at this?
Yeah, I mean, these facts are well known, Neha, and it's not India alone that has this stark inequality. I mean, the Piketty report that Mr. Mehrotra was talking about, it created a furor because it brought the focus back on stark inequality between the top and the bottom, something which the world had lost track of. So we know that there is a great deal of inequality. The policy question is, what do you do about it? Now, when we come to what we can do about it, Mr. Saldana mentioned robbing the rich to feed the poor. You know, thankfully, all governments in India, by and large, have been very responsible governments. And none of them have tried to rob anybody to feed anybody else. And luckily for us, most governments, unlike, for example, in Latin America and Africa, we have had good governments right from the time of independence. Very responsible governments that by and large have constrained themselves physically. They've lived within whatever money they had, and within that, they have tried to advance an agenda of a positive discrimination, both social and economic, which started with the redistribution of land. You might have forgotten that. Sealing laws way back. That's when we started redistributing wealth that existed.
I think nobody who's studied any sorts of sciences, political science, would have ever forgotten that.
Redistribute future wealth. Yeah. So my point is
just
that,
one question. One of the things that really happened with Modi government was the EBS, the quota for the economically backward. Would that also be seen as a distribution of wealth? Could that be a tool for that? Would that be too much of a stretch to say?
See, the point over here is that, you know, when you bring in a policy measure, let's say for positive discrimination, right, or affirmation, you really have to have a cutoff limit somewhere. Now, these are all very detailed discussions as to what that cutoff point should be. Okay, not possible, as Mr. Mehrotra said, to do it on a show. I would say that we start from the data, we start from the statistics. Let us look at where India is today and then form the policy. Do we need a redistribution policy? We definitely do. What it should be will depend on the data.
All right, Vijay Sardana, 10 seconds. I'm sure you have a different take on that. 10 seconds, 10, 15 seconds.
See, my way of looking at it is that do whatever you want to do, but do not kill the entrepreneurship. Do not kill the people, those who have potential to grow this country. You can do your politics with whatever you want to do, but for God's sake, do not suppress human potential. We had a problem of brain drain. We will now have a problem of wealth outgrow. I think we have to be logical and sensible and
All
start
right.
learning the private capital
Okay,
which people
absolutely. And I don't think any one of us would disagree with that as well. Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, Sanjeev Ahluwalia, as well as Vijay Sardana, thank you very much for joining us. Our endeavor today was to just go beyond the politics and try to understand what the core of this entire issue is, to give a real picture, a reality check on where India really is. Thank you very much for joining us.